This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today on This is Horror, it is part 2 of the conversation with Brian Asman. Now, Brian is the author of a number of books, including I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today, Nunchuck City, Man Fuck This House, and most recently, Good Dogs. And Good Dogs was one of the reasons that we got together for this conversation. It is a fascinating one that I think you're going to love. But before we jump in to the second part, a quick advert break.
In 1867, the young Samantha Gray marries the infamous Captain Jakes, unleashing a series of brutal horrors in this epic splatter western from Death's Head Press. Mayhem Sam by J.D. Grays is a rip-roaring tall tale of revenge, drags a coffin full of gold across the hellscape of Reconstruction, Texas, and explodes at the top of a mountain. You better read this one with the lights on.
Are you a reader with an insatiable appetite for creeping dread? Do you hunger for fiction of an eldritch nature? Try Cosmic Horror Monthly, a magazine dedicated to publishing the very best in cosmic horror and weird fiction. CHM offers tomes in digital and print, and when you subscribe today, your first print copy is free. Hurry, before the stars finally align.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Brian Asman on This is Horror. So you were saying before about there being a point with Man Fuck This House where you were selling 5,000 copies a day. So, I mean, that combined with how viral it went, I imagine that this book must have changed your life in some way. So I want to kind of talk about that. And I wonder, has it changed your approach to your writing routine? Did it mean that you quit a job that you previously had? I mean, what does this look like? Because those are some good numbers.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it changed anything too obvious. So I still have my same day job and no plans to leave that. I really love my day job, and I'm lucky in that they're super supportive of my writing career. So I really get the best of both worlds here. So yeah, the success of Man Fuck This House didn't really change anything on the ground for me. But I think the biggest change was the way that I felt about myself, honestly, because, as a writer, we're looking for that external validation. And people go entire careers without really getting it. And, when the book started blowing up, I was like, oh man, this is just, this is the dream right here. It just made me feel a little bit more free with my writing, actually. Just knowing that I had already accomplished something that I had set out to do. And from here on out, like, everything else is essentially gravy. Like I definitely want to continue growing and expanding and, finding new, fresh approaches to storytelling and things like that. But it did free me up a little bit. I lost the anxiety that I had about, like, oh, will I ever do anything that's worthwhile or that anyone gives a damn about,
Yeah, and I suppose what we didn't touch on before was you obviously said now Man Fuck This House is out of print because it's going to be re-released, but given it was presumably by a significant margin your bestseller, was there reluctance to put that out of print? I mean, because on one hand, you're getting a great deal with a trad publisher, but on the other, that's over a year of potential sales that you're now not getting.
That's true, but you have to think about the long game in this business. And sure, like the book continued selling throughout its entire lifetime up until the moment that I took it down, basically, which was, definitely nice to have that little extra income coming in every month for sure. But it didn't bother me at all to take it down because the future is going to be much brighter. And I'm very excited for people to experience the new version of it.
All right. Well, shifting back to Good Dogs, I mean, a lot of this is about family and specifically the family that you choose. So I want to know broadly, I mean, what does family mean to you?
What does family mean to me? So I think, the book is really about finding your people. And sometimes when you think you found your people, it things aren't perfect. There are still personality conflicts, and you still question your place in the world and how you relate to other people. And I think the message of the book is essentially that that's a journey. Even when you find people like you, no one is ever going to be completely like you. There will still be those conflicts that you have to deal with. And it's just a matter of learning to accept yourself and be happy with who you are, no matter what situation you're in or who you're with.
And I mean, in terms of writing a book that was so concerned with family, I mean, if we were to ask you about influences in terms of werewolves or slashers, then that would be the obvious direction to go in. But I wonder are there some kind of hidden influences in terms of the family and the tribe dynamic to the book?
Hmm. That's a good question. There probably were, but I can't think of anything that comes to mind at the moment. Some of the dynamics, though, for the family in the book were taken from Wolfpack dynamics. So I did do some research on that and tried to, kind of import a little bit of that. And during the days of the change, they're in this kind of liminal space, right, where they're a little bit closer to their wolf selves during the day, and it influences their thoughts and behavior. And it's all about how they cope with that, right? And how do you deal with having a condition where you black out and lose time and become a danger to the world around you, and then you are not quite yourself. And I think we've all had times, right, when we have things going on in our lives and we've had experiences where we're like, oh man, I feel like I don't feel like myself right now, and stresses get to you and you have like kind of like a blow up or something with someone, and you're just like, oh man, that's not the person I want to be. That's not who I am. It's all about just kind of reorienting and going and trying to become the person you want to be.
Right, and it's interesting that we're touching on this because I think all of us at some point we have crises of identity, but being a werewolf is the ultimate identity crisis because I mean, then who are you? Because at one point you're the werewolf, at one point you're regular Brian, and so yeah, it must be something very difficult to grapple with.
Yeah, and that's why I think the werewolf is such an appealing trope to people. Similar to like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde trope, right? Where we all feel like we have this animal nature, this instinctive nature inside of us that's reactive, right? Where we will react to situations that we put in and we're put in, and we don't always react well. We don't always react the way that we wish we had, right? And it's sometimes we're just grappling with this internal struggle between, the person that we want to be and the person that we sometimes can't help but be.
Yeah, and I think there's an even deeper struggle because if you're to ask, who am I? And it's like, well, in what situation? Because the person you are with your colleagues is going to be different to your friends, to your partner, to your mother. So
Yeah.
it just opens this entire kind of philosophical musing that could become a kind of crisis and a panic if one isn't careful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the deepest question of the human experience, right? Like, who am I? What am I? Where do I fit?
Is it something that you battle with a lot?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I like to say I've always felt like a bit of an outsider all my life, and even when I find people who are share interests with me or other things, like I still feel like a bit of an outsider. And so a lot of Delia's struggle in the book is directly imported from my life, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I even find, thinking about where I fit in terms of the horror genre can be a confusing one. And I imagine perhaps for you as well, because our work doesn't necessarily fit in this neat box and this neat section. So even looking for belonging and where your place is within a community that you're so embroiled in can be tough.
It really can, yeah. I mean, I certainly have days where I look around at the community and I just feel like, wow, I just feel completely on an island by myself.
Maybe that's it. Maybe as long as our islands are just near each other, then we can call
Yeah,
over. Hey, Brian, how's it going on your little island?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I know with Good Dogs that you said that you initially, or at least early on into the process, you not only envisaged a sequel, but an entire trilogy. So, I mean, how much of that is fleshed out, and what kind of has to happen? I suppose this one has to sell a lot of copies, for the sequel to occur. And is that a conversation that you've had with Blackstone or your agent at this point? Is that just something where we're far too early to even begin that discussion?
I mean, I think it's a little early right now. So, to your first question, yeah, I essentially have concepts for what the second and third books would be, if we were to go down that road of doing a full trilogy. I certainly have titles in my mind, which I'm really excited about the titles. If you can probably guess what the title of the second book would be if you look at the title of the first one. There's kind of a natural title there, and even the third one kind of flows from there as well. So yeah, I do envision a trilogy here because I think there's a lot more to explore both in the world and with these particular characters. I kind of look at it becoming almost sort of like an X-Men type thing, where there's you have this group of outsiders and there's a conflict within them amongst how they should exist or coexist with the rest of the world, right? So I think there's a lot of fertile ground for potential sequels here. But yeah, what would have to happen? This book needs to sell really well in order to justify a sequel, let alone two. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think probably the next book after Man Fuck This House will probably be a standalone. Those are the ideas that we're going through right now. But like I said, anything's possible, and sequels would definitely be on the table if this one does well.
Yeah, I suppose as well, you spoke before about not wanting to be typecast. Then there's kind of an art in terms of the release schedule, because if you put out too many back to back werewolf books, well, now you've inadvertently been typecast into the werewolf guy. But I
Yeah,
mean,
that's why I'm hopeful that like the next book will be a standalone and then perhaps return to this world. And hopefully that won't be too many years in between this one and the potential next one that would put off audiences. I think this one does come to a solid closure, so it doesn't necessarily. No one's going to be. It's not like Game of Thrones where like people are going to be waiting 15 years to find out what happens next. Uh, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, and in terms of your current writing routine, I mean, we spoke a little bit about it 2 years ago, but I don't know if there have been changes, with the new publisher and the new way of doing things. So, what is that looking like for you right now?
My writing routine is fairly the same. So I do have a day job, and so I'll work all day and then take my dog for a walk to the beach, come home, eat dinner, and then I usually try and write for between half an hour to an hour every evening. It just depends on what I have going on, and that could vary widely depending on the specific project that I'm working on. So if it's something that I'm very enmeshed in, that hour, half an hour to hour could stretch out to the entire evening, basically. And then on weekends, I can obviously devote a bit more time to writing. And so it just depends. Although as the years go by, I find I am giving myself more permission just to kind of chill. And I don't feel the same. I think when I first started, Michael, and we were first getting to know each other in YouTube Bob, I felt a lot of desperation. That was my primary emotion when it came to writing. I think we always feel like we're starting too late in life, no matter when we start, and even though I was kind of like just prime age for getting into writing, I was very, very desperate to achieve things, right? To see those publications, to see books on the shelf. And now getting over that hump, I don't feel that same desperation. I feel like I can take a breath and just sort of enjoy things now, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think even if statistically we see that we're getting into writing at the prime age or even younger than other people, we'll always look at those outliers and we'll be like, oh, but there's this one person called Eric LaRocca, for example, who's
Yep.
just, they're at that stage a little bit above. And it's like, well, don't look at the outlier. look at all the other people, or better yet, just concentrate on yourself. You don't need to be concerned with what other people are doing. But I do think it's human nature, and it also seems to be human nature to have that little doubt goblin in your head being like,
Mhm.
oh, you're a bit shit because of blah blah blah. It's like, no, fuck off, doubt goblin. I don't want to hear
Mhm.
from you.
Yeah, exactly. I try not to think about that stuff too much and just focus, like you said, focus on my own journey. I think as writers, if we begin comparing ourselves to others, that's not really a good place to be. I think, because you can never see what all the work someone has put in, right? And so I never feel jealousy towards anyone else or enviousness towards anyone else. I don't like allow myself to feel those emotions because I think they're counterproductive. But I do sometimes have times where I was like, man, I wish I had developed more discipline when I was younger. I think back on all the nights that I decided to go out drinking for 7 hours instead of being like, oh, I'm just gonna stay home and like work on my craft or something like that. But then again, like all the things I experienced during my my 20s when I was living in San Diego and partying all the time, I'm like, all that stuff informs the person I am now, right? Like, and I think even thinking back on all the time that I feel like I quote unquote wasted, that's one of the things that made me the writer I am today and helped me develop that discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think also some people, for me, I needed to read a lot of books in order to become a writer, right? And I always read voraciously, but I've managed to develop a pretty intuitive sense of story, which is why I can pants things. It's like I kind of feel the rhythm as I'm writing, right? And I know the sorts of things that need to happen next, right? Because I know I can intuitively feel the structure of the book as I'm writing it now. And I think when I was younger, I couldn't do that. And I think that's a lot of my early attempts at writing failed because most commonly I would be writing something and I'd be like, I have no idea what should happen next. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing that stopped me. And, as I got older and read more, well, I know how plots work now. And I know essentially there are a handful of things that can happen next in any given story, right? Depending on what's gone before, right? You get to a certain point, you're like, okay, the characters need to learn some new information or they need to go into a different situation, or there needs to be some reversal in their relationship or something, you know?
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from on there. The thing that I'm 57, so I've probably got maybe 20, 25, 30 years, if I'm very, very lucky, uh, of a career ahead of me, which is a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't sub for 10 to 12 years because my skin was thin and I got a painful rejection and I beat myself up over it. But I used that time to learn craft. And like you, I had to learn how to plot. I had to read a lot, widely and variably, with all kinds of stories, you know. And so it's being 57. I don't feel old. At least I don't now. Um, so I still feel as though I'm in you and Michael's age group, and so because we're all kind of coming up at the same time,
Yeah.
so the age part doesn't bug me. It's am I going to have enough time to do all of the things that I want to do? And I could sit there and beat myself up over things that I regretted in the past and things like that, or I could put my butt in the seat and do the work I need to do. And
Yeah.
that's my game. That's my game right now, is putting my butt in the seat and doing the work that I need to do. Because if I don't do the work, then I'll never accomplish anything.
Yeah.
And I have to accomplish
Exactly.
something. I feel like that's that my time of what I want to do with my writing is starting to happen. I'm just getting started.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I mean, I think it's counterproductive to sit around and think, "Oh, I wish I had done X, Y, or Z 10 years ago." Right? That's not helpful thinking. But what is helpful is to capture that feeling, right, and then go, "Okay, how would I feel in 10 years if I like what? How can I prevent myself from thinking the same thing 10 years from now?" Right? What can I do today to ensure that 10 years from now I look back and feel like I used this time wisely? So that's kind of more the way I look at it.
Well, what I want to find out a little bit more about is I know that you've got a film deal that you've alluded to in the past. So is there anything you can say about it right now?
Unfortunately, no updates. I can tell you, this is the second film deal I've gotten from Man Fuck This House. The original one was in development for like a year, and then the writer's strike happened, and then a bunch of projects got canceled by that studio, and I was one of them. But we got the rights back and sold them again. So that was about a year ago. So it's been in development for about a year. There's 2 years left for them to start to do stuff or extend it. So no updates, unfortunately, on that. But it's Hollywood. It's how it goes. I tend to put that out of my mind. Like, I don't think about it. I only think about it when someone brings it up, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got a film deal for that, don't I?" Like, huh. Or if there's like an update from my agent or something like that. But overall, I think you have to learn how to be patient in when playing the writing game, And so I think the thing I've developed is whenever I finish a project and it's like truly out of my hands, I just don't think about it. So like the first novel that I got my agent with, I gave it to her and she started shopping around, and then I just kind of forgot about it entirely. And it'll, if it's because it's out of my hands. If there's something needed for me at some point, then I'll think about it again. But otherwise, like, it's just out there. I'm on to the next thing. Like, that's what you have to do, is just kind of, give your all to every project. And then when it's done, release it into the world and let what will happen, and move on to the next thing, so that you don't just drive yourself crazy waiting for updates and refreshing your email constantly.
Yeah, that seems a wise approach. And I always think with film news, it's like celebrate the stage that you're at, but don't jump any stages ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it's like, yes, I want more to happen, right? I want this to get made. I want it to be super popular. I want to go to a horror convention and see people dressed up as characters from the film, whatever. But also I tell myself, I have made it so much further than so many people who pick up a pen and decide to start writing, right? And I am so thankful every day for the success that I do have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly a good and a grounded way to look at it. And in terms of your film deals, am I correct in thinking that your film representative is also connected to your publishing house? Or have I
That's cor-
completely made that up?
no, that's correct. So Brendan Deneen is my editor at Blackstone, and he also represents me for film.
So did Brendan begin representing you before the deal, or did that come as part of the deal?
It was essentially before, but it was essentially all essentially around the same time. So he has a kind of an interesting role at Blackstone. He specializes in selling Blackstone properties to Hollywood studios. So he has a lot of experience in film world and a lot of contacts, and so he's kind of in a unique position as an editor at a publishing house. It's not really a thing that most publishing houses have.
So I wonder too, I mean, does that mean when he's editing, does he occasionally think of the story when particularly developmentally editing in terms of how this might translate to the screen, or in terms of how he can pitch it to houses, or does he try to kind of turn off that part of the brain while editing the story?
But no, that's part of every conversation, but it would be anyway, because that's how I write. So when I sit down to write something, I am always thinking about what it would look like as a movie and how this would translate to the screen. And so he and I are very much on the same page there. And the thing is, there's never come a time when I've felt like we have to do something in order to make it more palatable for Hollywood that would compromise it artistically. So it's never really been like a choice between one or the other.
And so what is it that you're writing at the moment? And in addition to, your fiction work, are you also screenwriting at the moment?
I'm not doing any screenwriting right now. I'd like to get back to that eventually. But what I'm working on right now is we're still working through edits on the last couple stories that are going into Man Fuck This House, the expanded version. So that's been, over the last couple months and this month, that's really been my focus. It's kind of funny. So when we were first talking about what stories do we put in this collection, right? Brendan had me drop a list of every short story I've ever written with a log line. And then he went through and was like, okay, these are ones that I think could fit in the collection. And so there was like maybe 20. And so we pared it down from there. And it's interesting because some of the stories are actually stories that I wrote for the Story a Week Challenge in 2017, strangely enough. And it's been fun revisiting those. There's a couple that I essentially rewrote from the ground up. And one thing I've noticed about me recently is I am, for some reason, completely just writing novelette length things at this point in my career. So I can do short stories if needed, but like everything I sit down to write turns into like 16,000 words or something like that, which is great when you're doing your own collection and can just do whatever, but it's just kind of funny that I've hit on this ideal length for me right now as something that's not traditionally saleable.
Yeah, I tend to find a number of my stories come in at that length as well.
Yeah.
I know that John Langan has had the same happen,
Yeah.
with him. Like a short story by John Langan is not a short story, but
No,
at
it's a
least
novelette.
yeah, that's it. And
Yeah. I think I'm finding more and more with just every idea I have. I want more room to play with it and ease into it. And I don't know, it's just, I've done a couple short stories for various things that, people ask me to do, but that novelette length novelette length is just kind of my sweet spot these days.
So then does that mean with Man Fuck This House, the short story collection, you've got about, what, 50 or 60,000 words for Man Fuck This House, and then, what, another 30 or so of short stories?
Something along those lines. Yeah. So we've got. I mean, I'd say the new version of Man Fuck This House is about close to 50,000 words, which the original novella was 40,000, and then we've got. We're still finalizing what exactly is going into the new version, but it's going to be a very, very packed volume. We've got probably 6 or 7 short stories we're including, and at least 2 of those are novelette length, so like about 15,000 words. And then the others are, like I said, I tend to go long, so even my short stories tend to be a bit longer than just average. So
This is going to be a considerably sized tome.
yes. Well, that's part of the goal is like, when you're re-releasing something like this, I want everyone who bought the first version to go, oh shit, I need this.
Right.
And it's like, how do you make it appealing to the people who already own the book? Well, it's like, well, it's an expanded narrative. So if you liked the book before, this is a better version of it. And then also, hey, if you like my writing, here's some exclusive short stories you can't get anywhere else,
There you go.
I was going to say for people tuning into the second half only, remember, if you sell 10 million copies, you're buying
Yes.
someone a haunted house.
I am buying someone a haunted house. Yes, exactly. So the other thing is with adding short stories in, these are all potential properties that we can sell to studios, right? And we're shopping a number of those things right now, actually, and so hopefully we'll get some nibbles.
Right. I mean, that's the great thing as well. Like a studio, they're not so constrained in terms of the length of the story. If it's a compelling enough idea, then they'll consider adapting it into a film. And I often think it's easier for them to adapt a short story or a novella because it's a tighter concept.
Yeah, that's what they're looking for these days, and so yeah, it's definitely a lot of opportunity there with shorter fiction, and that's what we're doing essentially. And I will say the one thing I think I am quite good at, if if nothing else, is hitting on like a concept that's just like, oh damn, that's a cool idea, and so all the short stories in there are just, I don't want to spoil anything yet, so I can't talk in specifics, but like, at least for me, they're all like, these just really, when you hear them, you're just like, oh shit, that's a pretty cool idea. Because so much of what I do is just taking 2 different concepts and mashing them together, right? So, which is great for, selling stuff to Hollywood, because I've got natural log lines in my head for literally everything I do.
Yeah. I can't wait to read these stories, and I'm
Thank you.
glad that there's only going to be a year until it's out in the world. And I mean, is that kind of a pattern that you're aiming for, to put out at least 1 book a year? Would you
Yep.
put out a couple a year? I remember Stephen Graham Jones being told by, I think it was either his agent or editor, it's like, whoa, you got to slow down. You're putting out too many.
Yeah, but then now this year he had multiple books come out that did really well. So it's like the market dictates essentially how often I can release stuff, and I've got to work in concert with my agent and my publisher and everything like that. So ideally, I would love to have a new book come out every year, or a new novel come out every year, and perhaps some years have a novella come out at like the 6-month mark, in between. So we'll see what happens. I mean, that would certainly be the goal, is to have that level, to be that prolific.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're certainly going in the right direction for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I mean, we've touched on this before, but I mean, I know there are a number of people who are listening and they're trying to kind of take things to the next level with their writing. And yeah, we've said you've gone from indie to trad publishing and kind of a hybrid model. But I mean, what advice do you give to those people who are looking to reach that next level as a writer? And what are the sorts of things that they should be doing right now?
Sure, definitely. So I think my number one piece of advice for anyone who wants to write is to read a lot, write a lot, and don't be a dick. I think if you can do those three things consistently, then you will eventually have some sort of success. Like I mentioned earlier, the 2017 Story a Week challenge that we did through This Is Horror. And I met a lot of people who were around the same, same level as me back then. And when I look back at that group, like so many of them have gone on to publish short stories or publish a novella. And what they had in common was that they just didn't give up. The writers that are successful are the ones who did not stop writing, essentially. And so if you write for a year or something like that and maybe submit a couple things and they get rejected and then you give up, well, that's your career, right? But if you keep doing that for 5 years, if you keep doing that for 10 years, I mean, show me the writer who's written 10 full novels and not gotten an agent or not gotten a smaller press to publish one of those, right? And I'm talking about literally soup to nuts, 10 full novels. That's the order of magnitude of what you have to do. When I was starting out, I heard this guy talk about, writing. He mentioned like write 1 million words and then you're ready to begin or something like that, right? And because I'm very literal, I created an Excel spreadsheet and I tracked everything I wrote and the word count, and I hit 1 million words in a couple of years, like as I was really writing furiously. The Story a Week challenge was one of the reasons I was able to do that. I do think when you do it that much, you can't help but learn things, right? You develop a sense of what sounds good, and you develop a sense of rhythm and things like that. And then the other thing is, I think the most important sense you can develop as a writer if you want to be successful is how good your own work is in relation to others. I think you see this a lot with newer writers where they come in, they're like, I'm the most brilliant writer ever, and you have to, or they're like, my writing is complete shit. And you have to develop that in-between sense of, okay, here are my strengths as a writer, and here's what I do need to work on. I mean, I can give you a long list of things I think I need to work on as a writer, but I do have a couple strengths that I truly believe are true strengths of what I do. And so you just have to develop that. I think back on my first couple stories I submitted and the first rejections I got, I was like, what the hell, man? These stories are brilliant, like blah, blah, blah. And then like, you wait a couple years, you get back and you're like, oh, that kind of sucks. And, as you grow, you will be able to look more objectively at your own work the more you write. And so I think that's an important sense, is like how good your own stuff is. And then again, you can't compare yourself to other people because you don't know. You can only see the finished product. No one ever sees all the work that gets put in to things. And so you just have to think about where you're at and where you want to go and, how you get there.
Yeah, I think as well, like people can see a rejection or they can see low sales and they feel, okay, this is a failure or this is a terrible thing, but actually they're not seeing it in context. They haven't seen the kind of wider vision. And
Yeah.
I mean, one of the short stories I wrote that I thought is probably the best thing that I've written in terms of short stories, like I kept getting really close to different markets that were really good markets, but then kind of being shortlisted and then it didn't work out. And then eventually I landed the short story with No Sleep podcast, but then that was behind their paywall. But, it's still a pretty sweet podcast
That's a great
to get the
podcast.
story on. And now fast forward, because I wrote that around the time of one story per week. It may have even been, I think the first story on that challenge where I thought, oh, now we're singing. Now I found my voice. So if we fast forward now, 7 years later? I can't believe it's been that long, by the way.
I know. That's crazy.
And now I've expanded that into a novella. So I'm looking at publishing that either this or next year.
Nice.
I've also written a script for it, so I'm looking at shopping that around. So this initial perceived failure is like, give it some time and actually it's turning into a good thing. So I think we should never see things as a failure just because we think they're bad in the moment. You know,
Yeah.
even you mentioned before that Our Black Hearts Beat as One is your least popular book, but it only takes like a moment for something to go viral, or let's say, your other book to become a movie, and then somebody reads that, and the sales pick up. So I think as long as Our Black Heart is still beating, then we've
Yes.
still got a shot of making it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I completely agree, and the other thing is you have to take the win, like you said, you have to take the wins when you get them. So for the example of Our Black Hearts Beat is one, yeah, that hasn't done as well commercially as I wanted it to, but I've had a couple people tell me that it's like one of their favorite books they've ever read. So like that's completely worthwhile to me, even if it doesn't ever do anything. And like you said, you never know what can happen. Like, a book can become popular like years after it comes out. People can always rediscover it. And as I do more stuff like Good Dogs, I'm hoping that people go back and take a look at some of my older work and, you know, have some fun with it.
Mhm. I want to go to something that you said earlier about, especially with new writers, they see the finished product, they don't see the nuts and bolts behind it, and they don't, everyone has to come into their own process to find their voice, and that's probably the most important thing that a young writer can do is to try to identify and find their voice or voices that they would like to use. I mean, think about like William Burroughs, who wrote Naked Lunch. Naked Lunch was a cutout novel. He found pieces of articles of newspapers and magazines and blacked out words and constructed them, and found a story in those found words, and then he wrote Naked Lunch. He
Yeah.
concocted that list and then actually added his own stuff, his own spin, and that's how he developed his voice. You have people like Dean Koontz who writes 10, 15, 20 drafts of the same book over and over and over again just to get it into shape in his voice. And so there's a lot of nuts and bolts. I'm not saying you got to pay your dues, but in a sense, it would help that if you could find a way to identify what you want to do with fiction and what you want to do with story and hone in on that, and that's your strength. You're always going to have a weakness. You can write for 20 years. Your list of weaknesses should maybe get a little smaller, but you should still
Yeah.
have them. You should always be growing, but find your voice. It's whatever it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of people start out copying the voices of writers they admire. I know when I first started, I was writing like almost like parodies of Thomas Ligotti, right? Because I was very enamored with his style, with his voice, and with his approach to horror. And so I was writing, like I think if you write a ton, your voice will eventually start coming out, right?
Mhm.
It's just consistency and repetition.
Well, on social media, I asked different writers and listeners of the show to talk about what some of their writing struggles were so we could perhaps address some of them. And Kev Harrison said that landing the ending is always something that fills him with dread. So I wonder, do you have any thoughts or any advice for those looking to really stick it with that ending?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So I think for me, at least, generally, endings, there's really only ever one ending to anything I'm writing. And what I mean by that is the book sort of tells you how it needs to end, right? There's you like based on everything that's happened before, who the characters are, what they care about, what's going to resonate with them, how they change, etc. I think you get to the end, and there might be different decisions that could be made, but really, there's just one essentially fulfilling ending that can happen, and it's generally something of a reversal of their initial circumstances, or it's they're back in their initial circumstances having changed themselves a bit. So I think you see this is one thing where like studying screenwriting really helps a lot. You think, okay, let me use John Wick as an example, right? In the beginning, he's got he loses his wife, but he's got this dog, and then he loses the dog, and then he has to go on this whole journey to essentially kill the entire Russian mafia. And at the end of things, like he gets another dog, right? And he's going from being alone and having nothing in the world but violence to having some hope in his life again, right? And I think the only ending for the first John Wick, there's certainly many ways it could have ended, but I think the only true ending for it was him finding something like that, something like another dog, in order to live a full life again.
Yeah, so you almost have to interrogate your story and, ask yourself, is this the kind of authentic ending? Has this in some way gone not exactly full circle, because there needs to be a change, there needs to be a fundamental shift, but I suppose there is some sort of symmetry or some poetry to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think if you look at the kind of what's the mirror image of their initial circumstances, that's one way to do it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, you want a mirror. You want to basically, what I call fulfill the totem, because you're going to have some type of totem, something that's going to come back and back again. I think that you want to be something that's unpredictable, but completely logical. And to me, those are the endings that I love the most, because it's like I didn't see that coming, and it makes perfect fucking sense.
Yep.
And I love that, and that's what I strive for when in my own stories. It's like how could this, with careful and skillful misdirection, how can I make this ending happen? And so the answer is at the beginning of the story, and so it's like, it's like screenwriting. The problem with your second act is your first act, and that's you have to learn how to recognize that. It's hard to do, but you sometimes you screwed up at the beginning and you just need a little fix, and wow, man, now everything just fits together.
Yeah.
Which of your stories has been toughest to end?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. I mean, so I think I will get with Man Fuck This House there, because I won't spoil anything for the audience for those who haven't read it, but there is a point near the end where, as a writer, I had a decision to make. So initially, I had a very different ending for the book in mind. And I get to this point where it's like the decision point, right? And I had this idea for like something crazy that could happen, or I had an idea that was a much more kind of like normal thing that could happen. And I just decided to swing for the fences. So I think generally, as a writer, if you go big and fail, then that's fine, because you won't regret trying, right? But if you go for something safe, then I think that's something that you may regret, is not giving something really your all.
Yeah, I definitely like to go with the more explosive ending,
Yeah.
using explosive in as all-encompassing a way as possible,
Yeah.
Well, another problem that a writer has had is from Laura Senf, and she wants to know, any tips for juggling projects and deadlines, and not only logistically, but making that kind of mental space to be able to hold on to multiple projects at one time.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if you can, having some dedicated time, you might have a similar deadlines for two different things, and going, okay, this is the thing I'm going to work on first, this thing I'm going to work on second. Or if you really have to work on them in parallel, just going like, okay, I'm going to do a 20-minute sprint on this, and then shift gears and do a 20-minute sprint on that. Also, I think as a writer, often there's something that we're like that's coming a little bit easier, and don't be afraid to do the one that's like a little bit easier, and race through that. And then I think the other thing is that it's, just remembering that this is a craft, and writing books are works of engineering as much as art. And sometimes you just have to put something together that's going to hold together and feel good enough about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the other kind of aspect of that as well is balancing the writing time with the social time, with the time with family and friends. And I mean, we can feel guilt if we neglect either our social circles or indeed our writing. And, the whole aim is to not feel guilt at all. But it's like, just finding that rhythm, and it's a difficult thing to talk about because I think there's no formula. It's not like, right, 60% family, 40% writing. If it was that easy, then that would be
Yeah.
great, and we'd probably make a lot of money from just giving that formula
Yes.
now. But I guess it's finding what is right for you and right for you at that time. If there's a deadline, then I think your family and friends are going to understand that you're putting a little bit more time into the writing. Equally, if there's a family crisis or emergency, then it's not only completely reasonable but expected that the writing and other commitments are going to temporarily disappear.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's also important to remember that writing, like butt in chair time, has diminishing returns. I think for me, I find that a good hour is about my limit. And then I need to get up and do something else because, that next half hour is going to be less productive, and the half hour after that will be less productive. So, giving yourself breaks. And then I think the other thing is, if you have deadlines and you really have made it, given it your best shot, and you're worried about making a deadline, just have an open and honest conversation with your editors. And most of the time, I find in publishing, deadlines are a little bit fungible. I try to make all of my deadlines, but like there was a situation over the summer where I was invited to do a story for this anthology, and we're coming up on the deadline, and I'm like, "Hey guys, can I have an additional 2 weeks? Is that going to put you out if I have some extra time to work through this story?" And I was like, I had my backup plan in mind already, that I had a way I could just kind of quickly end the story. It wouldn't be the best thing I've ever written, but I would meet the goal. But I had a better version of the story that I could write with more time. And so I just asked them, and they were like, "Sure, no problem." So I think a lot of the time in publishing, people will say, "Sure, no problem," as long as they're not going to press like the following week or something like that.
Yeah, it would be pretty bizarre for a publisher to be like, you know what, just send a lesser story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think the key there is just open communication, really. And that's the key to a lot of life, frankly, is, talking over expectations, making sure everyone's on the same page. Most people are very easy to work with. So, but as long as you're communicating.
Well, I wonder, what are some of the best horror films and horror books that you've experienced this year? And they don't necessarily have to have come out this year, but just that you've personally read or watched.
Sure, definitely. I guess let's start with books. American Narcissus by Chandler Morrison. I'm a huge fan of Chandler's work. It's kind of a take on Great Gatsby set in LA, with a bunch of, characters struggling with the vapidity of modern life, essentially, and there's some very dark undertones throughout the book. So I really enjoyed that one. Another one I dug a lot was Deliver Me by Elle Nash. So highly recommend that to everyone. That's kind of about the horror of, pregnancy, and there's some bug stuff, and it's just really, really cool, fucked up book. Definitely more about I learned more about chicken processing than I ever wanted to. Another one I read recently was, I finally read House of Leaves. I had tried to start it before a couple years ago, got like 50 pages in, and it wasn't the right time. And this year I decided I was going to give it another shot, and I really ended up loving it. Once I got past the first, 50, 60 pages and a lot of the preamble stuff. And I started, there are multiple narratives. And once you allow yourself to get used to the multiple narratives and switching back and forth between like the voices and everything like that, it really began to work for me. And then, you hit these spots where like it's a very dense book for a lot of it, but then you hit these spots where you'll just like, there are like 50 pages go by and there's like a sentence on each page or something. And you get some momentum from those like bursts of like, I'm 50 pages further into the book than I was before. So yeah, I think those are three that I would certainly recommend that I've read recently.
And what about on the film side of things?
Yeah, then movies. I'm trying to think. So Oddity, have you guys seen that?
Yes, from the same guy who did Caveat.
Yeah, it's on Shudder right now. I really enjoyed that one. There's another movie I watched recently, and it's called, I think I need to look it up real quick because I don't remember the exact title. It's a very long title. Let's see. Oh, yes, it's Onyx the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls. So it's about this guy who's like a wannabe wizard who works at like a burger shack, and he gets there's this famous Satanist who like has a contest and brings all these people to his mansion in the middle of nowhere to like summon a demon. And it's horror comedy. It was a lot of fun. The guy who plays the main character just cracked me up. He's got this like, he's got this like funny manic energy, and he constantly lapses into like announcer voice when he's like talking, in real life, like that kind of thing. And I adored that movie. So yeah, those are a couple of recent ones I'd recommend.
Are you sure that you didn't write that latter movie? It totally sounds like a Brian Asman story.
I know. I think that's why I vibe with it so much, because I see, I'm watching this movie. I'm like, oh man, I feel like I would really get along with the guy who wrote this.
I'm gonna have to check that one out. Ascendant. Just from the title, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's. I feel like it's not really getting any play on like movie Twitter and anything like that. So, yeah, I definitely recommend people check it out.
Yeah, did you watch that on Amazon, on Shudder, or at a cinema?
It's on Amazon right now.
Yeah, okay,
yeah. I always have to like try and remember where I watched whatever, because I have all these different streaming services, and I'm just bouncing between them, trying to,
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, do you have a final writing tip or piece of life advice that you'd like to impart to our listeners?
Yeah, I will actually give the listeners something very specific that I found. So I found when writing action scenes, if you look at 3-act structure and apply that to your action scenes, that it actually works really well. And so essentially, like good action scenes will often have like all of the beats that exist within 3-act structure, right? So there's like an inciting incident. There's a reason why the action kicks off in the first place, right? And there's like, after about a third of the scene, right, when you enter the second act of the action sequence, right, you want to have like a bit of a reversal, right? You want to have like fun and games where you're delivering. If you're saying like, a ninja is fighting a bear, there's, you better have a section there where it's just bear on ninja action and it's just fun, and then, towards the end of the action sequence, there needs to be like an all is lost moment where the protagonist is going about, how are they going to get out of this one? And, then eventually, they triumph. So, you just, throw in different reversals. And I think that's what helps action scenes remain interesting, because I actually get bored reading action scenes a lot if they're not written well, which is funny because it's like, oh, this is the most exciting stuff in the book. But if it's not delivered in a way that, okay, so I always, this is my favorite example of an action scene that I feel doesn't work. So in the second Matrix movie, Matrix Reloaded, when Neo is fighting like the 100 Agent Smiths, right? I was bored to tears during that scene because there's absolutely no stakes to the scene whatsoever, right? Like he can't really hurt any of them. They can't hurt him. It's just action for the sake of action. And so I think, you want to deliver stakes and you want to have you want to have beats, and you want the action sequence to also be about something if you can. So my favorite example of this is in Lethal Weapon. There's a scene where Riggs and Murtaugh go to a drug dealer's house to take him down, and the drug dealer resists, and an action scene pops off. Right, the scene actually serves as a debate between Riggs and Murtaugh based on their different styles of policing. So like everything Riggs does is like trying to kill the guy and take him out, right? Everything Murtaugh does is to try and like essentially capture him semi-peacefully, or at least alive, right? And so I think when you in each back and forth, there's a back and forth action between each of them during the sequence, and it works just so well as like a debate between these two, a physical debate between these two characters. So I think when you're writing action, if you just think about things like that, it's like, how can I make this more than just a car chase? And how can I, within the car chase, have all the different beats that make this a satisfying sequence to read, where it's not just cars go vroom, but there are reversals, there are unexpected things happening. There's, all of a sudden a monster truck has joined the car race or car chase or something, there's a bridge out, stuff like that, that's my writing advice that I'd give to people.
That is a phenomenal tip or section of tips, and hopefully all of the This Is Horror podcast listeners are now immediately going to become better at writing action scenes, because like I know when I read a good action scene and I know when I read a bad one, but nobody has quite distilled the reason or the essence as well as you just did there. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, where can our listeners connect with you?
All right, so I'm on all social media platforms as @TheBrianAsman. I am still on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. It's going to be Twitter until the day I die. So I'm still on that platform. I'm on Instagram a lot, and I generally post to Facebook from Instagram. I also have a TikTok, but I don't really have much content on there. And then my website is brianasmanbooks.com. I do sell signed copies of my books on there. So if you're looking for, to get my signature on anything, you can grab it through the website.
All right. Apart from immediately buying Good Dogs, which is out right now, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
It's always a pleasure to come on this podcast, and it's especially cool just because I've known both of you guys for so long now, ever since you were some of the first people I met when I entered the genre, frankly. And the podcast was a great resource for me as far as learning about the craft of writing, learning about people's journeys. And, it was a source of inspiration hearing from so many different writers at different stages of their careers. And going, wow, if all these people can do it, I can do it too. So it's always, this podcast kind of feels like coming home when I come back on it. And I'm definitely looking forward to talking to you guys on this thing again at some point in the future.
Oh, hell yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Brian Asman on This Is Horror. Join us again next time when we will be chatting to David Dasmolchian. And if you want to listen to that and every other episode ahead of the crowd, become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only will you get early bird access to each episode, but you can submit questions to an array of interviewees, writers such as L.P. Hernandez, Richard Chismar, Ross Jeffrey, and Eric LaRocca, to name but a few. You can also get access to exclusive Discord channels, videocasts, the full interview ahead of the crowd with no advert breaks, a lot of different perks, and you're also helping to keep the show alive, to keep me and Bob doing what we love to do here at This Is Horror. So that's patreon.com/This Is Horror. Check it out, see if you like it, and if it is a good fit for you, then I will see you there. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
Are you a reader with an insatiable appetite for creeping dread? Do you hunger for fiction of an eldritch nature? Try Cosmic Horror Monthly, a magazine dedicated to publishing the very best in cosmic horror and weird fiction. CHM offers tomes in digital and print, and when you subscribe today, your first print copy is free. Hurry, before the stars finally align.
In 1867, the young Samantha Gray marries the infamous Captain Jakes, unleashing a series of brutal horrors in this epic splatter western from Death's Head Press. Mayhem Sam by J.D. Grace is a rip-roaring tall tale of revenge, drags a coffin full of gold across the hellscape of Reconstruction, Texas, and explodes at the top of a mountain. You better read this one with the lights on.
Now, in addition to becoming a patron, there are a multitude of ways that you can help the podcast absolutely free of charge. And one of those ways is to leave a review over on the Apple Podcast website or on Spotify. You can also follow us on one of our social media platforms. We are now on Threads as well as Blue Sky and Twitter, as this bizarre dance, this battle for social media dominance takes full force. And I wasn't planning on getting on Threads, but Stephen King joined. So what other choice did I have? So if you're there, if you're on Blue Sky, if you're on Twitter, come and say hello. We are either at This Is Horror or at This Is Horror Podcast, depending on the platform. Well, that about does it for another episode of This Is Horror. And I can't wait for you to tune in next time, because I am very excited for you to hear our conversation with David Dastmalchian, an absolute horror legend. He was in one of the standout films of last year. He really is a horror sensation in the horror cinema world, and he is taking the graphic novel horror scene by storm with the likes of Knights vs. Samurai and Count Crowley. So get ready for next episode with David Dastmalchian. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.